My mother-in-law slid a taped-shut baby box across the table and whispered, "Open this when you're alone." I tore it open right in front of my husband instead. The second he saw what was inside, his color drained completely. He grabbed my hand and whispered, "We're calling the federal marshals." The tape made a sound like tearing skin, and for 1/2 second, that was the only sound in the room. It was 7:40 on a Thursday in April, 20 guests deep into the rehearsal dinner at a rented back room in Millbrook, string lights taped along a drop ceiling, a cash bar in the corner nobody had touched yet. Carol had slid the box across the tablecloth an hour earlier, small, brown, sealed with 2 strips of packing tape gone yellow at the edges, and told me, quietly, under the noise of somebody's toast, to open it when I was alone. I meant to. I really did. Then Daniel leaned over to ask what I was holding, and some instinct older than manners made me tear the tape right there, in front of him, in front of everyone, instead of carrying it upstairs to open in private the way his mother had asked. Inside was a manila folder with a federal seal stamped across the top corner. Eagle, scales, blue ink gone slightly gray with age. Under the seal, typed in a font that hadn't been fashionable in decades. U.S. Marshals Service. Witness Security Program. Relocation Authorization. File No. WS 1198. Below that, a name that didn't belong to anyone at this table. Minor. Baby boy Ashworth. A birth date 28 years old. A sealed case number redacted in thick black marker that had gone translucent with time, so that if you tilted the page under the light, you could almost read the digits underneath. Daniel picked it up before I could say anything. I watched the exact moment his face changed. Not confusion, not surprise, something closer to recognition, like a word on the tip of his tongue finally landing. His hand found mine under the table and gripped it hard enough to hurt. "We're calling the federal marshals," he said, so quietly that only I heard it. And across the table, his mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth and didn't move again. None of us knew yet that a bridesmaid's phone, propped against a water pitcher 3 feet away, had already caught 11 seconds of the open box on a live stream to 400 followers, or that by midnight, a stranger neither of us had ever heard of would be looking at those 11 seconds and reaching for a phone of her own. I'd been dating Daniel Voss for 2 years before I met his mother in anything but the most surface-level way. Carol was polite, composed, the kind of woman who remembered how you took your coffee after being told once and never asked again. I'm an archivist for the county library system. I spend my days deciding which fragile things deserve to survive and how, and I liked her precision at first. It read like care. Carol's kitchen always smelled like the same cinnamon candle. She kept a chipped blue mug on the drying rack that she never once explained and never once threw away. Her dog, an aging beagle named Biscuit, barked at the mail carrier every single day at 11:15 like it was a scheduled appointment, and Carol would say the same thing every time. He thinks it's his job. And I found the sameness of it comforting, the way a person finds comfort in things that don't change. The red flags were small enough that I filed them under grief, not secrecy. Daniel's father, Robert, had died when Daniel was 19. Heart attack, Carol said, though she rarely offered more than that. And the one time Daniel asked what exactly his father had done during his 20 years with the Marshals Service, Carol changed the subject so smoothly it took me a week to notice she'd done it at all. There were baby photos in Carol's hallway that Daniel used to joke didn't look like him. "I don't know, Mom. I think I had a fatter face." And Carol always laughed and moved him along to the next frame before he could look too long. I grew up a military kid, 4 schools before 8th grade. My father reassigned every 18 months without explanation past orders came in, and I know the particular tension of unspoken rules and no reasons given. I promised myself, marrying into this family, that I would not build a life on things nobody would name out loud. I didn't know yet how literally that promise was about to be tested, or how fast. Cycle 1. By the time Daniel and I made it out of the restaurant's back room and into the parking lot, 3 separate people had already stopped us to ask what the old FBI stuff was. I told myself it was nothing. A rehearsal dinner rumor, gone by morning, the kind of story that gets one round of gossip and dies. Then I checked the bridesmaid's account standing right there under the parking lot lights, my thumb shaking slightly against the screen. The live stream had ended, but a screenshot of the open folder, seal, name, case number and all, was already sitting in a group chat with 19 members, forwarded twice, with a caption that just said, "My stomach dropped in a way I can only describe as physical, a small elevator falling out from under me." I went back inside and asked everyone at the table to delete their photos. 6 people said they hadn't taken any. 2 said they had and would delete them right away. Nobody could tell me who else in the room might have. I stood there holding an empty champagne glass someone had handed me an hour earlier, not knowing what else to do with my hands. Cycle 2. Daniel called the Marshals Service emergency contact line from the restaurant parking lot at 9:15 that night, reading the case number off the folder in a flat, careful voice I'd never heard him use before, the voice of someone reciting something to keep from feeling it. 2 deputies arrived at Carol's house the next morning before either of us had slept more than an hour. Deputy U.S. Marshal Renata Cho, 14 years with the Witness Security Program, did most of the talking. Her partner, a younger deputy named Okafor, mostly photographed the folder page by page with a handheld scanner and said almost nothing at all. I told myself this was routine, a box being checked, paperwork closing a loop. Then Cho asked to see every phone that had been in that room the night before, and her tone made it clear this wasn't a courtesy request. This file was never never supposed to leave sealed archive storage," she said, in the specific, unhurried cadence of someone choosing each word for a record that would outlast the conversation. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I unlocked my phone and handed it over. Cycle 3. Cho's team traced the leak within 6 hours, not to the group chat, but to the original live stream itself. The bridesmaid, a friend of mine named Nora, had cut the feed the moment she realized what was on camera, but 40 seconds had already gone out live, and platforms don't unsend things. I told myself 40 seconds, 400 followers. It would die there the way most things online quietly die. Then Okafor found it re-uploaded on a clip account with 11,000 followers by 10 that night, captioned, "Witness protection reveal at a wedding?" with 3 exclamation point emojis I couldn't stop staring at. I tried calling the platform's trust and safety line myself, on hold for 40 minutes while Nora sat across from me crying into a dish towel. Apologizing on a loop, I finally had to ask her to stop. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I didn't have the room left to comfort her and manage the crisis at the same time. Cho eventually took the phone out of my hand and said, gently but firmly, that federal takedown requests moved through channels I didn't have access to, and that I needed to let her office handle it through the proper chain. Cycle 4. 2 days later, Assistant U.S. Attorney Owen Price, 11 years prosecuting organized crime cases out of the regional office, sat across from Carol's kitchen table with a legal pad and told us the reason for the sealed marker on the case number in the first place. The file connected to a federal witness tampering and trafficking prosecution from 28 years earlier, docketed under a statute that kept the identities of cooperating witnesses and their dependents sealed indefinitely, not just for the length of a sentence. One man convicted in it, a longtime enforcer named Silas Bracken, had been paroled 6 years ago after serving most of a reduced sentence on 11 separate counts. A local detective named Lucia Fenn, 19 years with the sheriff's department, had already been quietly looped into the case file because a mutual acquaintance of Carol's from her old church circle had mentioned, almost in passing, that someone had recently been asking around about the Ashworth boy. Fenn drove out that same afternoon with a folder of her own, cross-referencing Bracken's known associates against anyone with a recent address change in the county, methodical in a way that made the whole thing feel, for an hour, unbearably real. I told myself this was old business, a scared old man rattling a cage he no longer had the strength to open. Then Price said the timing lined up almost exactly with when Carol had started, in his words, trying to control the disclosure herself, meaning the box, meaning the whisper, meaning the whole quiet plan that had unraveled in front of 20 wedding guests instead of unfolding the careful way she'd rehearsed it in her head for years. My throat went tight. That was the piece nobody had explained yet. Why now? Why like this? And not any of the 1,000 ordinary evenings that had come before it. Cycle 5. I confronted Carol the next evening in her kitchen, with Daniel upstairs on another call with Cho's office, and Biscuit asleep under the table like nothing in the house had changed at all. I asked her, as plainly as I could manage, why she hadn't simply told her son the truth years ago in a quiet room, on an ordinary day. Why the taped box? Why the whisper? Why me instead of him? Carol's hands were flat on the counter, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a composed answer ready. "I thought you'd read it first," she said. "I thought you'd find the gentle way to tell him. I've spent 28 years deciding how much of this he could survive knowing at once. I didn't think I could say it out loud myself, not even now, not even to save myself the trouble I've made. It wasn't an excuse, exactly. It was, I understood then, the only method she'd ever built. Manage the information, control the exposure, never hand anyone the whole thing raw and unfiltered. It had worked, in its narrow way, for 28 years. It had also meant that when something finally moved faster than she could manage, she had no other gear to shift into, and neither did any of the rest of us. That was the night I stopped thinking about Silas Bracken and started thinking about archives. It's my actual job to understand how records decay, not physically, but in the sense that matters here. How a document marked sealed in one system quietly becomes visible in another, through nobody's malice, just through the ordinary erosion of cross-referencing over time. I sat at Carol's kitchen table with my own laptop at 11 that night and did what I do for a living, 5 days a week, without ever once expecting to need it like this. I searched public court dockets for the smuggling case's original filing number, which wasn't sealed. Only the personal identifiers inside it were. I found, 3 links deep, a public records request filed 8 weeks earlier by a name I didn't recognize. Raina Sutter, independent producer, Open Record Podcast. Open Record turned out to be a mid-sized true crime show. 40,000 subscribers specializing in cold federal cases pulled together from FOIA requests and old court dockets. Exactly the kind of patient, legal, entirely legitimate research that could accidentally reconstruct a sealed identity out of adjacent public pieces. Sutter's request had pulled unredacted court exhibits from the original 1998 smuggling trial, including exhibit references to the surviving minor child of cooperating witnesses James and Elena Ashworth. She hadn't had a name to attach to that child. She hadn't needed one, not until 11 seconds of a wedding livestream, geotagged to a restaurant 40 minutes from where the trial had taken place, landed in her research folder from a tip account the next morning, sent in by someone in that 19-person group chat who thought it was interesting rather than dangerous. I called Cho at 6 a.m. Her voice sharpened the moment I explained what I'd found. Within 2 hours, Price had confirmed it from his end. Sutter's next episode, already recorded, already scheduled to publish in. I looked at the clock on Carol's stove. 19 hours. Paired archival trial footage with a clip lifted from the wedding livestream. Her research was accurate. Her sourcing was legal. And she had no idea she was about to publish a federal witness protection file to 40,000 people, because nothing she'd used to build the episode was itself illegal for her to possess or to say out loud. Detective Fenn's follow-up on Silas Bracken came in an hour after that, and it deflated the danger I thought I'd finally understood. Bracken had died in a prison infirmary 4 years earlier. A stroke, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone had bothered notifying Carol's old case file about, because notification in these systems only runs in one direction. The person asking about the Ashworth boy at that church function turned out to be Bracken's grandnephew, a genealogy hobbyist named Dominic building out a family tree on a weekend project, who had stumbled onto his great-uncle's old case number on a public sentencing database, and was doing exactly what harmless people do with old family mysteries, asking around politely at a church potluck with no idea what he was standing next to. Carol's instincts, tuned by decades of managing danger, had aimed her fear at the one shape she already knew how to be afraid of, and in trying to get ahead of it, she'd walked us straight into the one she didn't. "So nobody's coming," Daniel said, when I laid it out for him on the porch at 7 that morning, coffee going cold in both our hands, and I understood from his voice that he didn't know whether to feel relieved or robbed of the danger that would have at least made all of this simpler to explain. "It's a podcast. It's just research. Research airs in 18 hours, I said, to 40,000 people, with your birth name in it, and a wedding photo, and this restaurant's address in the background." He set his mug down on the porch rail so hard I thought it might crack. 18 hours became a number I stopped saying out loud after a while, because saying it made my hands shake worse each time. Price's office started the formal channel first, a request to the platform hosting the episode, a letter citing the sealed nature of the underlying case file, chain of custody documentation attached to prove the file's origin, and told us honestly that it could take 2 to 4 business days to fully process, longer if Sutter's legal team pushed back on First Amendment grounds, which they would be entirely within their rights to do, because none of what she'd gathered had been obtained illegally. Cho put it plainly at Carol's kitchen table, 11 hours out from publication, both of us standing because neither of us could sit still anymore. "The law is not going to move fast enough to help you here. I'm sorry. It just isn't built for 18 hours. It's built for careful, and careful takes days. We tried the fast versions anyway, and every one of them failed in its own way." Daniel emailed the podcast's general contact address and got an auto reply promising a response within 5 business days. I found a management company listed on Sutter's website and left a voicemail that was never returned. Carol, in what I understood later was less about strategy than about needing to do something with her hands, drove to the restaurant where the rehearsal dinner had happened and asked the manager to pull the security footage, as though that could undo 11 seconds already loose in the world. None of it moved fast enough. None of it was going to. Before I tried Sutter myself, I tried the version of this that would have felt easier, going through someone else. Open Record had a co-host, a younger producer named Theo, who signed off the show's outro every week, and I spent 40 minutes tracking down a personal account for him instead, reasoning that a friendly, indirect approach might land softer than a stranger calling cold. He wrote back within 10 minutes, polite and clearly rattled, saying he had no authority over the episode queue and no way to reach Sutter faster than her own listed lines. She guarded her editorial process the way I guarded fragile collections, tightly, alone, trusting almost no one else with the final call. That was a dead end, and it cost me 30 minutes I didn't have. It also told me something useful. If I wanted this stopped, it had to be Sutter herself, and it had to be direct. I had 18 hours, then 12, then 10, and exactly one skill that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with archives. I knew, better than any of them, how to find a person through the paper trail she'd already left behind her. Sutter had filed public records requests under her own production company name. That name had a registered business address on file with the state. That address had a landline, still listed, because independent podcasters rarely think to delist a business line nobody calls anymore. I called Dr. Faye Whitcomb first, a colleague of mine, 22 years in archival preservation, who'd once walked me through exactly how sealed federal exhibits get partially indexed in public docket systems. The same rabbit hole Sutter must have gone down herself. Faye helped me build, in 40 minutes over a shared screen, the same chain of documents Sutter had likely followed, so that when I finally called her, I wouldn't sound like a stranger begging for mercy. I'd sound like someone who understood her research well enough to be taken seriously as a peer instead of a problem. I called Raina Sutter at 9 p.m., 10 hours before her episode was scheduled to publish. She picked up on the 4th ring, wary, the way anyone is when a stranger cites their own business filing back to them. I told her who I was in one sentence, an archivist connected to the family in her upcoming episode, calling about the child referenced in Exhibit 14 of the 1998 case. I heard her go very still on the other end of the line, the particular stillness of someone doing fast math in their head. "That child is real," I said. My voice wasn't steady, not fully, but it held. "He's 28. He got married yesterday. He didn't know his own name until 3 days ago, and he found it out in front of 40 guests because his mother tried to hand him a secret in private, and it slipped in public instead. said. Your research is accurate and it's legal, and none of that changes what happens to him the second it goes live with his location tagged and his wedding on camera. There was a long silence, long enough that I checked my phone screen to see if the call had dropped. I built the episode assuming he was a case study, Sutter said finally. I didn't have a name to put to him. I didn't know he was, she stopped herself. The wedding footage. That's how you found me. That's how anyone will find him, I said. That's the part your reporting is actually right about. If you want it to still mean something when this is over, the danger to people like Daniel isn't some old enforcer coming out of retirement anymore. It's exactly this. Legitimate, careful, completely legal research colliding with an ordinary public footprint nobody thought to protect. If you publish this as planned, you're not exposing a hidden danger, you'll be the danger. She asked for 2 hours to think and to make her own calls. I gave her Price's direct line and chose case number, and sat on Carol's porch step with my knees pulled up to my chest, unable to eat the sandwich Daniel had made and left beside me untouched, unable to do anything but watch the porch light attract moths against the dark the way it must have every ordinary night of Daniel's childhood in this house, under this name, built on a foundation none of us had known was there until 3 days ago. She called back at 11:40. Her voice was different, quieter, less like a producer and more like a person. She'd already pulled the episode from the production queue that evening, before Price's office had even finished drafting their formal request. She agreed, with Price on a three-way line to make the arrangement official, to a full redaction. No name, no location, no wedding footage. The child in Exhibit 14 discussed only in the abstract, the way it had been discussed in every public document until 11 seconds of live stream made it concrete and findable. For what it's worth, she said before we hung up, I built this show because I think sealed records sometimes hide real harm. I didn't think, until tonight, about what they're sometimes protecting instead. I didn't sleep that night either, but for the first time in 3 days, it wasn't fear keeping me up. Carol told Daniel everything the next afternoon, face to face. No folder between them, no whisper, no third party to soften it or carry it for her. His father, Robert Voss, had been the deputy marshal assigned to the smuggling case that killed Daniel's birth parents, James and Elena Ashworth, witnesses who'd cooperated against a trafficking ring and been murdered for it before their testimony could be finished on the record. Part of the same case that later sent Silas Bracken to prison for the rest of his working life. Robert and Carol had taken temporary custody of the surviving infant as part of the relocation plan, and temporary had quietly, deliberately become permanent and legal within the year. A choice made out of protection that had also, without either of them fully choosing it at the time, become a lifelong habit of never fully explaining anything to anyone, including, eventually, the son it was meant to protect above everyone else. I kept thinking there'd be a better time, Carol said, sitting very straight at her own kitchen table, hands folded like she was bracing for a verdict. Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment. Biscuit shifted under the table and sighed the way old dogs do. Then Daniel said the thing that had been sitting under all of this the whole time, the thing I hadn't let myself ask out loud even once in 3 days. You could have just told me. Any of the last 20 years, just told me. On a Tuesday, over dinner. Any day at all. I know, Carol said. I'm sorry it took a stranger with a podcast and 40,000 subscribers to get me to actually say it out loud, instead of handing it to someone else to say for me. We thought that was the last turn of the story. It wasn't quite. 2 days after the episode was pulled, Detective Fenn called with one more piece, delivered in the same flat, procedural voice she'd used for everything else. Dominic Bracken, the harmless genealogy hobbyist whose innocent questions had sent Carol into a panic in the first place, had, completely independently, with no idea any of this had happened around him, posted his own family tree research publicly to an open genealogy forum 3 weeks earlier, including a scanned newspaper clipping from 1998 that listed the smuggling case's docket number in the photo caption. It had been sitting there, unindexed and unnoticed by anyone, for 3 weeks. It was still there. Nobody had built anything from it yet, but it was public, it was searchable, and it was one more thread in exactly the kind of ordinary, legal, accidental exposure that had almost cost us everything this week. Sitting quietly in a corner of the internet nobody was watching. Cho's office filed to have the clipping's caption redacted at the source, a smaller, quieter version of the same fight, resolved in an afternoon this time instead of a crisis. But it was Faye who said the thing that actually stayed with me afterward. Sealed doesn't mean gone, she told me the next day over the phone in the same patient voice she used to walk students through fragile collections. It never did. It just means someone has to keep tending the seal, forever, or it decays like anything else left in the dark too long without anybody checking on it. Carol slid nothing across the table after that. The wedding itself happened the next morning anyway, because Daniel insisted, red-eyed and running on no sleep, that Bracken's ghost and a redacted podcast episode didn't get to cancel a day we'd planned for a year. It was smaller than we'd designed it. 3 guests from the rehearsal dinner quietly uninvited once we learned they'd been the ones forwarding the screenshot. Nora standing at the back instead of beside me at the altar, still too ashamed to be closer, though I'd told her twice by then that I didn't blame her for a phone propped against a water pitcher. Cho sent a single text that morning. 4 words. Cleared. Congratulations. Be well. I read it twice standing in a borrowed dress in a church basement, then handed my phone to my mother and didn't look at it again until the reception ended. Daniel's hand didn't shake once during the vows. Mine did, a little, but for an entirely different reason than it had 3 days earlier. A week after that, once the dust had settled enough for anyone to sit still, Carol sat down with the two of us together and opened a second box herself in front of both of us, smaller than the first, older. It held the only 2 photographs that existed of James and Elena Ashworth, and on the back of one, in handwriting that wasn't Carol's, a single line: "For our boy, whoever raises him, tell him he was loved before any of this." Carol had been keeping it, unopened by anyone but her, for 28 years, waiting for a private moment that never quite felt safe enough to arrive on its own. This time, she didn't whisper it to be opened alone. She set it on the table between the 3 of us and let us all read it together, in the same room, at the same time, the way it should have happened years before a stranger's podcast almost decided the timing for her. "That's the version I should have given you the first time," she said. Together, not smuggled across a table like something to be ashamed of. Daniel picked up the photograph. His hands were steady this time. A year later, a journalism class at the State University used the anonymized, redacted version of Raina Sutter's eventual episode, retitled in the end, "Sealed and Searchable," as a case study in accidental digital exposure, how legal, careful, entirely well-intentioned public records research can still reconstruct a life someone spent decades protecting, one small legal request at a time. No names appear in it, no location, no wedding footage, just the bare architecture of how it almost happened, laid out for a room of 20-year-olds taking notes. Daniel and I watched 20 minutes of the lecture clip online one evening, the 2 of us on our couch with the volume low, Biscuit asleep on the rug we'd inherited along with half of Carol's old furniture. Neither of us said anything until it ended. We recognized every detail: the timeline, the geotag, the platform's response time, the 18 hours counted out in the professor's slides like a stopwatch. The professor never once said our names. "Good," Daniel said finally, and reached for my hand the same way he had that night at the rehearsal dinner. Not gripping it in fear this time, just holding it, easy, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Good," I said back, and for the first time in a year, I meant it without a single reservation underneath it. I still work in archives. I think about sealed records differently now than I did before any of this. Less as locked doors and more as promises somebody has to keep renewing year after year, the way Faye said, or they quietly stop meaning anything at all. Cho's office sends Carol an annual letter now, a formality mostly, confirming the file's status hasn't changed. Carol keeps it in a drawer in the kitchen, unsealed, unhidden, right next to the takeout menus, where anyone in the house can see it if they want to. She still keeps the same cinnamon candle burning most evenings. Biscuit still barks at the mail carrier at 11:15 on schedule, like nothing about any of this ever happened at all, which is, I've come to think, exactly the kind of ordinary Carol spent 28 years trying to build for her son, and the kind we finally got to keep, once we stopped trying to protect it by keeping it a secret from each other.